Power does not always break a heart, Clara Whitmore's grandmother used to say. Sometimes, loneliness does. The crystal goblet slipped from Clara's hands the exact moment the entire ballroom went silent. It struck the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed far louder than it should have beneath the vaulted ceilings of Blackthorn Keep. For half a second, nobody moved. Hundreds of nobles dressed in silver-threaded velvet stood frozen beneath chandeliers glowing like captured starlight. Musicians lowered their instruments. Servants stopped breathing. Even the massive stone hearths lining the royal hall suddenly felt colder. Because at the center of the room, beneath banners bearing the silver wolf crest of the Northern Territories, the Alpha King had just been rejected. "I apologize, Your Majesty," Lady Celeste Hawthorne said softly, though her expression held no regret at all. She stood in a gown worth more money than Clara had seen in her entire life, diamonds glittering coldly at her throat. Beautiful. Perfect. Untouchable. But I would rather marry for affection than obligation. A dangerous sentence. Especially spoken to the most powerful alpha in the North. Yet Rowan Blackthorn did not move. Seated upon the raised platform near the Moonstone throne, he looked less offended than exhausted. Tall even while sitting, broad shoulders wrapped in dark formal tailoring, silver eyes unreadable beneath the warm glow of candlelight. He did not argue. Did not threaten. Did not even blink. Somehow, that made the silence worse. Clara stood near the back of the hall clutching an empty serving tray against her chest, trying very hard to pretend she belonged nowhere near this level of royal disaster. She was not nobility. Not important. Just the quiet assistant to the royal archivist, invited to help prepare records for the midwinter mating assembly and mostly stay invisible. Which suited her perfectly. Invisible was familiar. Invisible was safe. Then Lady Celeste curtsied politely and walked away. Just like that. As though she had not shattered weeks of royal negotiations in front of half the kingdom. The silence stretched 1 second too long. And something about it, something painfully awkward and strangely human, caught Clara completely off guard. The Alpha King, feared across territories, ruler of armies and winter borders, had somehow just experienced the same terrible embarrassment every ordinary person secretly feared. Rejection. Public. Quiet. Unavoidable. Before she could stop herself, a tiny sound escaped her. Not cruel. Not mocking exactly. More startled than anything. A small disbelieving laugh. The kind that slipped out when reality suddenly felt absurd. Oh no. Clara's stomach dropped instantly. Too loud. Far too loud. A few heads turned near her. Someone gasped softly. Another servant looked horrified. Did she just laugh? Somebody whispered somewhere nearby. Heat flooded Clara's face so quickly she thought she might disappear on the spot. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. She had survived 23 years of being overlooked only to accidentally laugh during the single most uncomfortable royal moment in recent memory. She lowered her eyes immediately, wishing the marble floor might open and swallow her whole. Surely the king had not heard it. Surely, silence. Strange silence. Heavy silence. Clara looked up before she could stop herself. Across the crowded ballroom, over rows of frozen nobles and glittering candlelight, Rowan Blackthorn was looking directly at her. Not angry. Not offended. Just, still. Entirely still. Like the entire room had disappeared. His silver gaze lingered too long. Long enough that Clara forgot how to breathe properly. Around them, whispers started spreading like winter wine through dry trees. But Rowan did not look away. And for reasons Clara could not begin to understand, something in his expression looked less like anger, and more like recognition. The ballroom never recovered from the silence. It only changed shape. Whispering replaced stillness the way frost slowly crawled across glass, quiet but impossible to stop. Clara could feel it spreading around her without needing to look. Curious glances. Judgment. Confusion. Somewhere to her left, two noble women leaned closer together, jeweled sleeves brushing as they lowered their voices. "Did that servant laugh?" one whispered. "At the Alpha King?" Another voice joined softly, cold. The question should not have unsettled her as much as it did. Why? Not anger. Not humiliation. Not even irritation. Just curiosity spoken in a voice quiet enough that the entire ballroom somehow leaned closer anyway. Clara stood beneath 100 watching eyes and suddenly felt far too visible for comfort. She lowered her gaze instinctively. "I did not mean disrespect, Your Majesty," she said carefully. "It just, wonderful." How exactly did one explain accidentally laughing at the most powerful man in the north without sounding completely foolish? Around them, silence stretched painfully. Advisors lingered near the throne platform pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. Nobles stood frozen in elegant discomfort. Somewhere behind Clara, a woman whispered, "This is painful to watch." Clara silently agreed. Rowan waited. No impatience. No pressure. Somehow worse. Because patient attention felt infinitely more dangerous than anger. His silver eyes remained fixed on her with unsettling steadiness, as though the entire room no longer existed. Clara swallowed once. It looked lonely, she admitted softly before she could stop herself. The words escaped too quickly. Too honestly. Immediate regret followed. Wonderful. Again. She had now accidentally insulted the Alpha King twice in one evening. A nearby noble actually inhaled sharply. Someone muttered, "Did she just say lonely?" Yet Rowan did not react the way everyone expected. No cold dismissal. No offended silence. If anything, something shifted behind his expression. Small. Almost impossible to catch. Surprise maybe. Lonely, he repeated quietly, like testing the shape of the word after not hearing it for years. Clara nodded before embarrassment could stop her. I mean, she tightened her grip on the serving tray. Everyone looked frightened of saying the wrong thing. And Lady Hawthorne? Clara hesitated carefully. She did not reject a king. The room felt colder somehow. Rowan's gaze sharpened. No, he asked quietly. Clara shook her head. She rejected a person, she said before she could lose courage. And I think that hurts no matter who you are. Silence. Deep enough to hear the fire crackling across the ballroom. One of Rowan's advisors shifted uncomfortably several feet away. Another suddenly became fascinated by nothing at all. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed too loudly. Clara immediately wanted to disappear into another country. Perhaps another continent. She had absolutely crossed a line now. Except Rowan still had not looked away. Stranger than that, something unreadable had entered his expression. Not offense. Not pity. Something quieter. Older. Tired, perhaps. Like someone hearing honesty after too many years of polished lies. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth moved. Barely. Not quite a smile. More like surprise remembering how one felt. You laugh at kings, Rowan said softly. And speak to them honestly. Clara's cheeks burned. I usually try not to do either. Somewhere near the front of the ballroom, someone coughed awkwardly. The atmosphere had shifted now. Nobles whispered carefully behind jeweled fans. Servants avoided eye contact entirely. Nobody understood what they were witnessing, which somehow made it worse. Or stranger. Rowan glanced briefly toward the advisors still hovering nearby like anxious shadows. Then back at Clara again. Entirely back at Clara. What is your name? He asked quietly. She blinked. Surely he did not care. Clara Whitmore, Your Majesty. His gaze lingered strangely at the sound of it. Clara Whitmore. Like he was committing the name to memory for reasons neither of them understood yet. Then suddenly, impossibly, Rowan stood from the Moonstone throne platform. The movement alone shifted the room. Conversations died instantly. Power settled naturally around him without effort. Tall. Controlled. Quietly dangerous in ways stories rarely captured correctly. Clara suddenly remembered she was standing entirely too close to someone kingdoms feared. Yet instead of dismissing her, Rowan stepped nearer. Not threatening. Careful. Curious. Like something unseen had shifted beneath the surface of the night. Then softly enough that only she could hear, he asked a question no king should have needed to ask. "Tell me, Clara Whitmore," Rowan said quietly, silver eyes impossible to look away from, "has anyone ever told you that there is something unusual about you?" The question lingered between them longer than it should have. Strange. Unusual. The kind of word people used when they were trying to be polite about something uncomfortable. Clara stood very still beneath the chandelier light, suddenly aware of how loud her own heartbeat sounded in her ears. Around them, the ballroom had transformed into something fragile. Nobody danced. Nobody laughed. Nobles stood frozen behind half-empty glasses of wine, pretending not to stare while very clearly staring. Because the Alpha King had stopped an entire royal assembly, for a servant girl who accidentally laughed at him. Wonderful. Just wonderful. Clara tightened her grip around the edge of the serving tray like it might somehow save her. Unusual, she repeated quietly, trying and failing to understand where this conversation had gone wrong. Rowan remained impossibly calm. Silver eyes steady. Searching. Not the distant attention of royalty enduring obligation. Focused attention. Intentional. As though he had spent years looking for something and suddenly feared blinking might make it disappear. "Yes," he said softly. "Has anyone ever said you feel different?" Clara nearly laughed again out of nervous confusion. Different? Her entire life people had called her forgettable. Quiet. Pleasant enough to overlook. She worked in dusty archives beneath Blackthorn Keep organizing forgotten records no one else wanted to touch. Her small apartment sat above the old library wing where winter drafts slipped through cracked stone windows every night. Nothing unusual about any of it. Nothing special either. Not really, she admitted carefully. Unless you count being painfully average. Something flickered behind Rowan's expression again. Not disappointment. Relief almost. Strange relief. Before he could answer, one of his advisors stepped closer from the edge of the platform. Older. Sharp-faced. Dressed in dark silver formalwear that somehow managed to look judgmental. "Your Majesty," the man said quietly, though tension sharpened every word, "the council is waiting to continue proceedings." The reminder settled coldly through the room. Right. Proceedings. Because tonight had not simply been awkward. Tonight mattered. Every winter, the Midwinter Mating Assembly gathered influential families across the Northern Territories for one purpose, finding a Luna worthy of standing beside the Alpha King. Not because Rowan lacked options. The opposite, actually. Clara had overheard enough whispers in the archives to understand the problem. Women admired Rowan. Feared him. Desired the title attached to him. But loving a man powerful enough to shift political borders with one decision? That terrified people. 3 public rejections in 2 years had already turned palace gossip cruel. Too cold, some said. Too distant. Too powerful to love properly. Clara had not believed half of it until tonight. Yet standing this close, Rowan did not seem cold. If anything, exhaustion lingered quietly beneath the control. Like someone deeply tired of being looked at and never truly seen. Rowan did not look away from Clara when he answered his advisor. "The council can wait." The room nearly stopped breathing again. The advisor blinked once. "Your Majesty?" Rowan's voice stayed calm. Controlled. Somehow more dangerous because of it. "I said," he repeated softly, "the council can wait." Clara wished very sincerely to disappear into the nearest wall. Nobles whispered faster now, scandal traveling across marble floors like wildfire dressed in silk. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, she heard her own name spoken quietly. Who even is she? The archivist's assistant. Why is he talking to her? Excellent question. Clara would also love an answer. Rowan took one step closer then, enough that candlelight softened across the sharp lines of his face. Not threatening. Careful. Curious in a way she could not understand. Tell me something honestly, he said quietly enough that only she could hear. When you looked at me tonight, his gaze held hers steadily. Did you feel afraid? Clara opened her mouth automatically to say yes. Because everyone feared kings. Everyone feared power. But the strange thing was, she had not. Not really. And somehow, that answer suddenly felt more dangerous than the truth. Clara should have lied. Any reasonable person standing inches from the Alpha King would have said yes immediately. Of course I was afraid. Everyone fears you. Safe answer. Sensible answer. The kind of answer that kept ordinary people alive and invisible. But standing there beneath silver chandeliers while the entire ballroom quietly unraveled around them, Clara realized something deeply inconvenient. She had not been afraid of Rowan Blackthorne. Awkward. Curious. Mortified beyond reason, certainly. But afraid? No. The truth settled heavily in her chest. Dangerous truth. Rowan waited patiently, silver eyes holding hers with unsettling steadiness. Not demanding. Not intimidating. Simply waiting as though the answer mattered more than anything else happening in the room. Clara glanced down at the tray still clutched awkwardly against her chest. No, she admitted quietly before courage abandoned her completely. Around them, silence shifted. A nearby noblewoman nearly dropped her drink. One of Rowan's advisors actually blinked in visible disbelief. Nobody said no to fear where the Alpha King was concerned. Rowan himself did not move. Yet something almost invisible changed behind his expression. Relief again. Strange, quiet relief. Why not? He asked softly. Clara hesitated. Because he looked tired. Because power looked lonelier up close. Because somehow beneath all the stories and titles and expectations, he had looked painfully human sitting there after being rejected in front of half the kingdom. But saying any of that aloud felt far too personal. Instead, she offered the safest truth she had. You looked sad, she said quietly. The ballroom stopped pretending not to listen. Somewhere near the musicians, someone coughed awkwardly into silence. Rowan's gaze sharpened slightly. Not offended. Surprised. Sad, he repeated, almost thoughtfully. Clara immediately regretted everything. That sounded less terrible in my head, she muttered under her breath. To her horror, the faintest hint of amusement flickered briefly across Rowan's face. Tiny. Barely there. But real. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed too loudly. Because apparently the Alpha King, who had terrified rival territories and negotiated winter wars without blinking, had nearly smiled at the archivist's assistant who accidentally laughed at him. The world had clearly stopped making sense. Rowan glanced briefly toward the ballroom behind her where nobles still stood frozen in scandalized confusion. Then back to Clara again. Entirely back to Clara. People usually fear disappointing me, he said quietly after a moment. Or they fear wanting something from me. Clara frowned before she could stop herself. That sounds exhausting. One advisor closed his eyes briefly like the evening had become physically painful. Rowan, impossibly, looked more intrigued than insulted. It can be, he admitted softly. Clara shifted awkwardly, suddenly too aware of how close they stood. Too aware of the hundreds of watching eyes. This was absurd. She belonged in archives cataloging old treaties, not discussing emotional exhaustion with royalty in front of half the northern territories. Your Majesty, a sharp voice interrupted suddenly. Lady Celeste Hawthorne stepped forward again from the crowd, jeweled posture flawless despite the tension sharpening around the edges of her expression. Beautiful smile. Cold eyes. Surely, she said lightly, glancing once toward Clara's plain servant dress, there are more appropriate conversations to be having tonight. The words sounded polite. They were not. Clara recognized dismissal when she heard it. Ordinary girl. Wrong place. Temporary distraction. Heat crept quietly into her cheeks. Right. Of course. This entire moment had probably gone on too long already. She stepped back instinctively. I should go, Clara said softly, lowering her gaze. I still have records to finish. But before she could turn away, Rowan spoke. Calm. Quiet. Certain enough that the room froze all over again. No, he said softly. Clara looked up, startled. Rowan's silver eyes never left hers. Stay. And somehow, the single word felt less like a command, and more like a request nobody in the room had ever heard him make before. The single word settled into the ballroom like snowfall over fire. Stay. Not sharp. Not commanding. Quiet enough to almost miss. Yet somehow more shocking than anything else that had happened tonight. Because kings ordered. Kings dismissed. Kings did not ask. And Rowan Blackthorne had spoken to Clara Whitmore like losing her attention suddenly mattered. Around them, whispers spread faster now, impossible to stop. Nobles leaned subtly closer beneath silver candlelight, jeweled hands hovering near untouched glasses of wine. Servants avoided eye contact entirely. Somewhere near the musicians, one violinist had stopped pretending to tune his instrument. Even Lady Celeste Hawthorne looked momentarily caught off guard, perfect posture stiffening almost invisibly. Clara, unfortunately, had forgotten how breathing worked. Stay? Surely he did not mean that. Surely this was royal politeness stretched accidentally too far. She stood frozen near the moonstone platform, clutching her serving tray like it had personally betrayed her. Your Majesty, Clara said carefully after a long second, lowering her voice as though quieter words might somehow make the situation less terrifying, I do not think I am supposed to stay. Rowan's silver eyes did not leave hers. Why not? He asked simply. The question felt absurdly unfair. Why not? Because she organized dusty records for a living. Because she still smelled faintly like old parchment and cinnamon tea from the archive rooms below the castle. Because women like Lady Celeste wore dresses worth thousands while Clara quietly repaired frayed sleeves herself after winter. Because she had accidentally laughed at him 30 minutes ago and somehow everything had gone horribly wrong since then. Clara hesitated awkwardly. Because, she said softly, I do not think anyone here wants me standing next to the Alpha King. A dangerous thing to say aloud. Honest too. Around them, nobody suddenly looked in their direction with incredible dedication. Rowan glanced briefly toward the ballroom. Toward nobles pretending not to stare. Toward advisors hovering nervously. Toward Lady Celeste, whose smile had cooled several degrees. Then calmly, quietly, he looked back at Clara. I did not ask what they wanted, he said. Silence. Complete silence. The kind that felt too large for the room. Clara blinked once. Twice. Somewhere nearby, an advisor quietly muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, this has become complicated. Rowan ignored him completely. For the first time all evening, Clara noticed something strange beneath his calm. Tiredness. Not physical exhaustion exactly. Something older. Heavier. Like years spent performing certainty for people who only cared about the crown resting on his head. People admired kings. Feared kings. Wanted things from kings. But loneliness still sat quietly inside a person no matter how expensive the throne looked. The realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Before Clara could answer, another voice entered the moment. Smooth. Polished. Dangerous beneath the sweetness. Surely, Lady Celeste said, stepping closer with elegant confidence, His Majesty does not intend to replace political alliances with amusing conversation. The insult landed softly enough to remain polite. Servant girl. Temporary entertainment. Nothing more. Clara lowered her eyes immediately. Right. Of course. This moment had an expiration date. Reality always arrived eventually. She is right, Clara said quietly before Rowan could respond. I should return to the archives. But Rowan's attention sharpened instantly at the sentence. Something almost unreadable flickered behind silver eyes. Frustration perhaps. Or refusal. Tomorrow, he said suddenly, voice calm enough that nobody interrupted, I would like you to join me for breakfast. The room stopped breathing again. Clara nearly dropped the tray for a second time that evening. Breakfast. With the Alpha King. Absolutely impossible. Entirely ridiculous. And judging by the expressions spreading across the ballroom, scandal had just found fresh air. Clara opened her mouth to refuse. Sensible people refused impossible situations. Yet before words arrived, Rowan asked quietly, steady gaze never leaving hers, unless the idea frightens you after all? And somehow, inconveniently, it still did not. Breakfast. The word landed harder than it should have. Not because it sounded dangerous. Because somehow, impossibly, it sounded personal. The ballroom held its breath around Clara Whitmore as though everyone had collectively forgotten how to exist properly. Nobles stood frozen beneath silver chandeliers. Advisors looked one polite sentence away from panic. Somewhere near the musicians, a violinist quietly lowered his bow with the expression of someone witnessing history unfold in very inconvenient ways. Because the Alpha King, who had spent years rejecting political pressure, marriage contracts, and carefully arranged alliances, had just invited an archivist's assistant to breakfast. Clara's first instinct was simple. Run. Politely. Quietly. Preferably into another province. She tightened her grip on the tray, pulse stumbling somewhere near her throat. Your Majesty, she said carefully, hoping steady words might somehow rescue the evening, I think there are probably more important people you should be having breakfast with. The moment the sentence left her mouth, silence deepened. Rowan remained perfectly still. Silver eyes steady on hers. Important, he repeated quietly, like he disliked the shape of the word. Clara immediately regretted speaking. Wonderful. Again. Around them, whispers sharpened. Did she just refuse him? Surely not. Nobody refuses Rowan Blackthorne. Clara wished desperately for invisibility. It had always suited her better anyway. Invisible meant no expectations. Invisible meant nobody noticed how little she belonged among silk gowns and royal politics. Most days she preferred the lower archive rooms beneath Blackthorn Keep where dust floated softly through candlelight and forgotten histories mattered more than people's opinions. Books never looked disappointed when she entered a room. Rowan glanced briefly toward the ballroom, toward nobles staring too openly now, then back to Clara again. Something quiet shifted behind his expression. Not irritation. Something closer to understanding. Do you know, he said softly, voice low enough that only she could hear, how many people spend entire evenings trying to be invited closer? Clara blinked. I imagine many. The faintest trace of amusement touched his face again. Tiny. Gone too quickly to trust. And yet, Rowan said quietly, you are trying very hard to leave. The honesty in the observation unsettled her. Because unfortunately, he was right. Clara hesitated awkwardly. She searched for words carefully. Safe words. I do not think I belong here. The sentence escaped softer than intended. More honest too. Rowan went completely still at that. Not distant stillness. Focused stillness. Like something about the answer mattered far more than it should have. Around them, the ballroom continued pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. Then slowly, carefully, Rowan stepped closer. Not enough to feel threatening. Just enough that candlelight softened the sharp edges of his expression. "Neither do most people in rooms like this," he said quietly. Clara looked up before she meant to. Something unexpectedly tired lingered behind his silver eyes again. Not weakness. Loneliness perhaps. The kind hidden beneath power until someone accidentally noticed. Before she could answer, Lady Celeste moved gracefully nearer once more, smile flawless and cold as polished silver. "Your Majesty," she said lightly, though tension sharpened every perfect syllable, "surely tomorrow's schedule is already full." Rowan did not look at her. Not even once. "Adjust it," he said simply. The dismissal landed quietly. Final. Across the ballroom, nobles suddenly found the floor deeply fascinating. Clara nearly stopped breathing again. This had officially become a disaster. A royal disaster. One she somehow stood directly inside. Rowan's attention returned entirely to her. "Tomorrow morning," he said calmly. 8 o'clock. Clara opened her mouth to protest one last time. Yet before she could speak, Rowan added something softer. "Stranger. Almost careful. Unless," he said quietly, "you truly do not wish to see me again." And for reasons Clara absolutely could not explain, the question suddenly felt far too difficult to answer honestly. The question followed Clara long after the ballroom finally began breathing again. "Unless you truly do not wish to see me again." Nobody had ever asked her something like that before. Not carefully. Not like the answer mattered. By the time she escaped the midwinter assembly, winter had settled heavily across Blackthorn Keep, snow drifting past the towering stone windows while cold wind pressed softly against ancient walls. Yet somehow, Clara still felt warm in all the wrong ways. Or perhaps nervous enough to mistake panic for warmth. The archive corridors beneath the castle had always felt safe. Quiet. Forgotten. Shelves stretched endlessly through candlelit hallways lined with old treaties and dust-covered histories no one else bothered reading. Here, things stayed predictable. Books never stared. Books never asked dangerous questions. Books definitely did not invite her to breakfast. Clara pushed open the narrow wooden door to the archive office with more force than necessary. "You look haunted." Clara nearly jumped. Mr. Everett Sinclair, royal archivist and collector of unnecessary observations, sat hunched over a stack of ledgers near the fireplace wearing spectacles permanently threatening to fall off his nose. Older, kind, endlessly nosy. Unfortunately observant too. Clara set the tray down harder than intended. "I had an unusual evening." Everett looked up slowly. "Unusual meaning spilled wine unusual?" Clara hesitated. "More like accidentally laughed at the Alpha King and then got invited to breakfast unusual." Silence. Deep silence. Everett blinked once. Then twice. "I am sorry," he said carefully. "Would you like to repeat that sentence slower?" "Wonderful." Hearing it out loud somehow made the entire situation feel even less reasonable. Clara dropped into the chair across from him and buried her face briefly in her hands. "It was an accident," she muttered. "He got rejected." I laughed. Then he asked strange questions and now apparently I am having breakfast with royalty. Everett removed his spectacles very slowly, the universal expression of a man reconsidering reality. "You laughed," he repeated carefully. "At Rowan Blackthorn." Clara nodded weakly. "By mistake." "And survived?" "Apparently." Everett leaned back, deeply suspicious of the universe. "That man has spent 5 years terrifying neighboring territories and avoiding political marriages." He paused thoughtfully. "Yet somehow you accidentally amused him." Clara frowned. He was not amused. The older man raised one brow. "Clara, the Alpha King invited you to breakfast after publicly embarrassing half the noble families in attendance." He gestured vaguely. "That is not indifference." Clara opened her mouth to argue before stopping herself. Because the uncomfortable truth sat quietly beneath everything tonight. Rowan had looked at her differently. Not politely. Not politically. Intently. Like something about her unsettled him in ways he did not entirely understand either. The memory tightened strangely in her chest. His silver eyes lingering too long. The quiet way he asked if she feared him. The relief, actual relief, when she said no. He kept asking strange things, Clara admitted quietly. Everett tilted his head. Strange how? Clara hesitated. He asked if people ever said I was unusual. Something shifted immediately across Everett's face. Small. Too quick to understand. Gone almost instantly. Unusual, he repeated carefully. Clara nodded. Like something was different about me. Everett stood abruptly, crossing toward one of the shelves far too quickly for comfort. That is, strange. Clara narrowed her eyes. You just said strange twice. Did I? He asked far too innocently. Before she could question him further, hurried footsteps echoed through the archive hallway outside. Too many footsteps. Too official. Clara turned just as the heavy wooden door opened. A royal attendant stood there dressed in black trimmed silver. Formal. Serious. Entirely too polished for midnight. Miss Clara Whitmore? The attendant asked respectfully. Clara stood slowly. Yes? The man bowed slightly. His Majesty requests your presence. Clara blinked. For breakfast? The attendant hesitated. No, miss. Something uneasy settled into the room. His Majesty requests your presence immediately. Immediate. The word settled wrong in Clara's chest the moment the attendant spoke it. Not tomorrow morning. Not breakfast. Immediate. Something had changed. The warmth lingering from the strange impossible evening upstairs disappeared beneath a slow wave of uncertainty. Beside the fireplace, Everett Sinclair had gone unnaturally still. Too still. Clara noticed it immediately. What happened? She asked quietly. The attendant hesitated, posture remaining perfectly formal. His Majesty did not explain. Somehow, that made it worse. Rowan Blackthorne did not seem like a man who summoned people at midnight for ordinary reasons. Especially not archivist assistants who accidentally laughed at him. Clara glanced toward Everett instinctively. Do I look worried? She asked softly. Everett adjusted his spectacles with the expression of someone losing an argument with fate. Profoundly. Wonderful. Exactly what she needed. Another public disaster. The older man hesitated strangely before stepping closer. Clara, he said quietly, lowering his voice enough that only she could hear, if Rowan is asking for you now. He stopped himself. Just answer honestly. Clara frowned. That sounds suspicious. It sounds experienced, Everett corrected quickly. Then, softer, and try not to panic. Too late. Panic had already arrived and unpacked furniture. The walk through Blackthorn Keep felt entirely different after midnight. During daylight, the castle moved with life, servants rushing through corridors, advisors carrying scrolls, guards shifting politely near doors. But tonight, winter silence stretched through stone hallways lined with silver lanterns. Snow drifted softly beyond towering windows while footsteps echoed too loudly against polished floors. The attendant led her deeper into the older eastern wing of the castle. Not toward dining halls. Not toward offices. Somewhere quieter. Stranger. Clara tightened her coat around herself as cold slipped through ancient stone walls. Can I ask where we are going? She asked finally. The moon chamber, the attendant answered. Clara slowed immediately. The what? The man hesitated. It is private. Wonderful. Private sounded alarming. Private chambers in castles rarely involved good news for ordinary people. The deeper they walked, the older the architecture became. Dark stone. Moon carvings etched into archways. Silver symbols woven into the floor beneath soft lantern light. Beautiful in the unsettling kind of way forgotten places often felt beautiful. Then something strange happened. Halfway down the corridor, Clara stopped walking without meaning to. A strange warmth moved suddenly through her chest. Not painful. Familiar somehow, though impossible to place. Like standing near a song she almost remembered. The lanterns along the hallway flickered softly. One guard near the doorway looked up abruptly. "Did you feel that?" he muttered quietly to another. Clara frowned. "Feel what?" But nobody answered her. At the end of the corridor stood enormous silver doors carved with wolves beneath a full moon. 2 royal guards stepped aside immediately the moment she approached. Respectful. Nervous. The attendant stopped beside her. "His Majesty is inside." Clara swallowed hard. "Alone?" A pause. No, that felt worse. Before she could ask anything else, the doors opened slowly. Warm silver light spilled across the floor. Inside stood Rowan near the center of the chamber, dressed no longer in formal court clothes but dark black fabric softened by exhaustion, silver eyes immediately lifting the moment she entered. Around him stood 3 older council members, 2 royal advisors, and something else Clara did not recognize at first. A large silver relic resting on a stone platform glowing faintly beneath moonlight pouring through the ceiling above. The entire room had gone quiet waiting for her. Rowan stepped forward first. Calm. Focused. Something unreadable moving quietly beneath his expression. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Then, after one strange pause too long, he added words that made Clara's stomach drop entirely. "I need to ask you something important." Important. The word echoed strangely through the moon chamber, heavier than the silver light spilling down from the open ceiling above. Clara stood frozen near the doorway while cold unease settled quietly beneath her ribs. Around the circular chamber, council members watched her too carefully. Not rudely. Not cruelly. Worse somehow. Like scholars studying a page that had suddenly rewritten itself. The silver relic resting at the center of the room pulsed faintly beneath moonlight, casting soft reflections across polished stone walls carved with wolves and ancient crescent symbols Clara did not recognize. Everything about this felt too deliberate. Too prepared. Rowan stood closest to her. Dark clothing softened the sharpness usually surrounding him, though exhaustion still lingered beneath his controlled expression. Yet tonight something else sat there too. Focus. Concern perhaps. As though he had arrived at a conclusion he had not entirely decided whether to fear. "I know this is strange," Rowan said quietly, voice gentler than she expected in a room filled with powerful people. Clara nearly laughed from nerves. Strange no longer seemed like a strong enough word. "That is one way to describe it," she admitted softly. One older councilman stepped forward slowly, silver hair braided neatly down his back. Stern face. Careful eyes. "Miss Whitmore," he said respectfully, though the word respectful sounded strangely new coming from royalty, "we only need you to answer a few questions." Clara hesitated. Questions about what? Silence moved through the chamber briefly. Rowan exchanged a glance with the councilman before looking back at Clara. "About you," he said simply. "Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful." Clara glanced toward the glowing relic. "That sounds alarming." Rowan almost smiled again. "Almost. Probably fair." The older councilman folded his hands carefully. "Miss Whitmore, growing up," he paused. "Did unusual things ever happen around you?" Clara blinked. "Unusual?" "Animals behaving differently around you," another advisor added quietly. "Strange dreams. Unexplained instincts. Feeling disconnected from others." The questions landed strangely. Too specifically. Memories surfaced before Clara could stop them. Winter birds landing near her windowsill when they ignored everyone else. Stray wolves lingering outside the library grounds without explanation. Dreams she never spoke about because they felt too strange, vast snowy forests, silver eyes she somehow trusted, voices she could never quite hear. And always the same impossible feeling growing up. Different. Not better. Not special. Just slightly misplaced, like everyone else had received instructions for being alive and she had somehow missed hers. Clara crossed her arms awkwardly. She hesitated. Sometimes. The room changed immediately. Small shifts. A councilwoman straightened. Someone near the doorway exchanged a look with another advisor. Rowan went perfectly still. "What kind of dreams?" he asked softly. Clara frowned. "Why does that matter?" Rowan hesitated long enough to feel honest. "Because," he said quietly, "something happened tonight." Clara looked between them carefully. "Something besides public humiliation?" The faintest trace of amusement crossed Rowan's face again before disappearing. "When you walked into the ballroom," he said, silver eyes steady on hers, "my wolf reacted." Silence. Clara blinked once. "Reacted how?" Nobody answered immediately. That felt terrible. Rowan exhaled quietly, like someone stepping carefully onto unstable ground. "It recognized something," he admitted. "Something it has not recognized in years." Clara opened her mouth to respond before suddenly, without warning, the silver relic at the center of the chamber brightened. Once. Then again. A soft pulse rolled outward through the room like moonlight becoming sound. Council members straightened instantly. One guard near the wall muttered something under his breath. Clara froze as warmth moved unexpectedly through her chest again. Familiar warmth. The same feeling from the hallway earlier. Stronger now. The relic pulsed brighter. Silver light stretched carefully across the floor until it stopped directly at Clara's feet. And for the first time all night, Rowan looked genuinely unsettled. "No," one council member whispered quietly. "That should not be possible." The chamber forgot how to breathe. Silver light stretched across the floor in soft waves, wrapping carefully around Clara's feet like moonlight recognizing something it had been searching for. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed willing to blink. Around the circular room, council members stood frozen beneath the glow spilling down from the open ceiling while winter stars shimmered somewhere impossibly far above. Clara looked down instinctively. "What is happening?" she asked quietly. No one answered. Which somehow felt worse. The silver relic pulsed again. Brighter this time. Ancient carvings along its surface shimmered softly, symbols Clara could not read beginning to glow one after another like forgotten words waking up. Warmth spread through her chest again. Not frightening. Familiar. Gentle enough to unsettle her more than fear ever could. Rowan stepped closer immediately. Instinctively. Protective without seeming aware of it. "Clara," he said softly, silver eyes unusually focused now, "are you all right?" Strange question. Because despite the room looking one moment away from collective panic, she somehow was. Better than all right, actually. Like something quietly out of place inside her had suddenly remembered where it belonged. "I think so," she admitted uncertainly. One of the older councilwomen took a careful step forward, hands trembling slightly despite obvious effort to hide it. "That cannot be possible," she whispered under her breath. "The moon relic only responds to," she stopped herself too late. Clara frowned. "Responds to what?" Silence again. Heavy silence. Rowan exchanged another glance with the council members. Tension moved quietly between them. Familiar tension. The kind created when powerful people already knew something and desperately wished reality had chosen another answer. Finally, the older silver-haired councilman exhaled quietly. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully, "there is something the kingdom has not spoken about openly for many years." Wonderful. Secret kingdom conversations at midnight. Exactly the direction every normal evening should take. Okay, Clara said slowly. That sounds concerning. Rowan almost looked apologetic. Almost. You know wolves have alphas, he said quietly. Clara blinked once. Yes? And betas, one advisor added gently. Gammas. Ordinary bloodlines. Clara frowned. You are explaining very basic things to someone who alphabetized werewolf treaties for 4 years. Nobody laughed. A mistake apparently. Rowan stepped closer again. Not because he needed authority. Because concern lingered quietly beneath his calm now. There was once another bloodline, he said softly. Rare. Ancient. Nearly impossible to find. Clara folded her arms awkwardly. You are being suspiciously dramatic. Rowan hesitated. Then quietly, Omega. The word landed strangely. Familiar somehow. Though impossible to explain why. Clara frowned. Omega? One older council member nodded slowly. True Omegas were believed extinct decades ago. Clara waited. Okay. Silence. Nobody seemed eager to continue. Rowan's silver eyes remained fixed on her with unsettling focus. Like he feared the answer as much as she did. The moon relic, he said carefully, only reacts to one thing. The silver glow brightened again before anyone finished speaking. Soft warmth curled through Clara's chest, stronger this time, enough to make her inhale sharply. Somewhere near the doorway, one guard lowered his head immediately. Another followed. Then, impossibly, one of the older councilwomen whispered something that changed the room forever. The last Omega, she said softly. Clara laughed once automatically. Nervous. Disbelieving. No, nobody laughed with her. Not Rowan. Not the council. Not the guard suddenly standing straighter beneath silver light. The silence told her everything first. Rowan stepped even closer then, expression unreadable beneath the moonlight. Careful. Gentle in ways powerful men rarely learn to be. Clara, he said quietly, voice lower than before, I think the kingdom has been searching for you without realizing it. The kingdom has been searching for you without realizing it. The sentence settled somewhere deep enough that Clara could not immediately react to it. Around her, the moon chamber remained painfully silent except for the soft hum of silver light spilling from the relic at the center of the room. Outside, winter wind moved somewhere above the open ceiling, distant and cold beneath the stars. But inside, everything had changed. Clara stared at Rowan as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. No, she said quietly after several long seconds. No, that is not. She stopped, shaking her head once. You have the wrong person. Reasonable answer. Necessary answer. Because Clara Whitmore alphabetized ancient records. Clara Whitmore forgot meals while organizing dusty archives. Clara Whitmore wore repaired sleeves because new clothes felt unnecessary. Important things happen to important people. Not ordinary women accidentally carrying serving trays at royal disasters. The silver-haired councilman stepped forward carefully. Miss Whitmore, no, Clara repeated more softly this time, not angry. Just overwhelmed. I think somebody made a mistake. The relic pulsed again immediately, brighter somehow, as though disagreeing. Wonderful. Even magical objects had opinions now. Rowan remained close enough that she could feel quiet warmth beneath the cold silver light. He had not interrupted her once. Had not pressured. Yet concern lingered openly beneath his calm in ways she was beginning to recognize. Like he feared she might disappear if the moment became too heavy. Clara, he said quietly, voice gentler than before, nobody has seen the moon relic respond in over 30 years. She laughed once under her breath. Nervous. Fragile. That sounds like someone else's problem. A tiny shift crossed Rowan's expression. Not amusement exactly. Understanding. I know, he said softly. Somehow, the words unsettled her more because he sounded sincere. Around the chamber, council members stood quietly watching. Not judgmental now. Reverent almost. Which felt significantly worse. Clara looked toward the guards nearest the doorway and immediately wished she had not. Both had lowered their heads slightly. Respectfully. Deliberately. Like something fundamental had shifted in the room and everyone else had somehow received instructions she missed. Why are they doing that? She asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one older councilwoman stepped forward, eyes unexpectedly kind. Because, she said carefully, an Omega has not existed openly within the Northern Territories for decades. The sentence landed too heavily. Omega. The word still felt disconnected from reality somehow. A thing from old stories buried deep in historical texts. Rare bloodlines. Forgotten bonds. Not real people. Certainly not her. Clara crossed her arms tightly. I am still me, she said quietly. I am still the woman from the archives. Rowan's attention sharpened instantly. Yes, he said without hesitation. Something about the certainty in his voice made her look up again. Silver eyes held hers steadily. No crown. No throne. Just impossible sincerity. You are still Clara Whitmore, Rowan said quietly. Nothing about that changes. The warmth in her chest returned unexpectedly. Softer now. Less frightening. Then something impossible happened. Rowan lowered himself slightly, not fully kneeling, not dramatic, but enough to stand closer to her eye level. Smaller somehow. Less king. More man. The entire council visibly froze. Apparently this was not normal behavior. You laughed at me tonight, Rowan said quietly, something almost human flickering beneath exhaustion in his expression. You spoke honestly when everyone else measured every word. His voice lowered further. Softer. And for the first time in years, he hesitated. Honest hesitation. Someone looked at me like I was a person before a king. Clara forgot what answer belonged there. Around them, the chamber stayed impossibly still. Then suddenly, the heavy doors opened again. Footsteps entered hurriedly. An advisor bowed quickly toward Rowan, tension written clearly across his face. Your Majesty, the man said carefully, glancing once toward Clara and the glowing relic, the council outside has heard rumors. A pause. The kingdom already knows something has changed. The kingdom already knows something has changed. The sentence moved through the moon chamber like cold wind slipping beneath locked doors. Around them, council members exchanged uneasy glances while silver light continued pulsing softly from the relic at the center of the room. Outside the heavy stone walls of Blackthorn Keep, rumors were already spreading. Clara could almost picture it happening. Servants whispering in hallways. Advisors lowering their voices. Nobles from the Midwinter Assembly piecing together fragments they were never supposed to understand. The Alpha King abandoning political negotiations. A servant girl summoned privately. The moon chamber opened after midnight. Nothing stayed secret inside kingdoms built on curiosity. Clara stood motionless beneath the silver glow, arms still crossed too tightly against herself. Everything felt impossibly large now. Too fast. Too unreal. Hours ago she had been organizing records and trying not to embarrass herself carrying serving trays. Now apparently magical relics glowed at her feet while powerful strangers lowered their heads respectfully whenever she moved. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Rowan rose slowly to his full height beside her. Calm returned instantly to the room when he moved, quiet authority settling naturally around him without effort. Yet something subtle had changed. Clara noticed it immediately. Earlier tonight he had looked tired. Distant. Like someone carrying loneliness too quietly to admit its weight. But now something steadier lingered beneath exhaustion. Purpose perhaps. Hope. Dangerous thing to find unexpectedly. The advisor near the doorway hesitated carefully. The council outside is asking questions, Your Majesty, he said softly. Several noble families are requesting confirmation. Rowan's expression sharpened slightly. Not cold. Controlled. They will wait, he said simply. The advisor lowered his head immediately. No argument. No hesitation. Clara looked between them uncertainly. Wait for what? Silence settled briefly again. Then Rowan turned fully toward her, silver eyes steady beneath the moonlight pouring into the chamber. For you, he said quietly. The answer landed strangely deep inside her chest. Too deep. Clara shook her head once. I do not know what any of this means. Honest words. Frightening words too. Because somehow the room already expected answers she did not have. Rowan's expression softened slightly. Rare enough to feel accidental. You do not have to know tonight, he said quietly. Nothing changes unless you want it to. Several council members exchanged visibly startled looks at the sentence. Apparently kings did not usually ask permission from destiny. Clara noticed. Rowan noticed her noticing. The faintest trace of amusement flickered briefly through his expression again. Small. Human. You are still free to disagree with everyone, he added softly. You already proved that rather impressively. Despite everything, a nervous laugh escaped her before she could stop it. I accidentally laughed at the Alpha King. Rowan tilted his head slightly. You laughed at an awkward moment, he corrected. There is a difference. Something warm shifted unexpectedly between them. Quiet. Strange. Familiar in ways neither of them fully understood yet. Then slowly, carefully, Rowan reached into the inner pocket of his dark coat. The room grew impossibly still again. From his hand emerged a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent wolf beneath the moon, old enough to feel important before words ever arrived. This belonged to my mother, Rowan said quietly. Several council members